Okay, this is getting crazy. It feels like barely a week of 2024 goes by when there isn't another value-focused, pure electric SUV coming onto the Australian new car market. And this is the latest, the Chery Omoda E5, a compact 5-seater with the range and performance to challenge some other recently arrived contenders.
That includes the already popular BYD Atto 3, as well as the Hyundai Kona Electric and MG ZS EV.
It joins the internal combustion Omoda 5, variations of which have proliferated in its roughly 18 months on the local market. We're about to take a look and get behind the wheel, so stay with us to see if this battery electric SUV is your entree into the electric world.
The Omoda E5 is offered in two grades, the entry-level BX at just under 43k before on-road costs, and the top-spec EX pushing close to 46k. That ever so slightly undercuts the BYD Atto 3 and MG ZS EV lineups and sits well under the Hyundai Kona electric range. And aside from the safety and performance tech we'll get to shortly, the BX offers up a handy standard equipment list. For all the details, check out my written review at carsguide.com.au. But the highlights are dual-zone climate control air, twin 12.3-inch screens covering multimedia and instrumentation, built-in sat-nav, 6-speaker Sony audio with digital radio, wireless and wired Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, 18-inch alloy wheels and all LED exterior lights. The EX adds more fruit, including synthetic leather trim over fabric and synthetic leather in the BX, power front seats, ambient lighting, a heated synthetic leather trimmed steering wheel, 8-speaker Sony audio, a power sunroof, power tailgate, a 360-degree camera view, sequential rear indicators and puddle lamps.
While retaining the overall shape of its petrol-powered siblings, the Omoda E5 does away with the combustion car's huge rear sloping grille and goes for this wraparound forward-pointing section, proudly bearing the model name and housing the centrally located charging port.
The rear is more or less unchanged, save for some detailed tweaks to the bumper design.
But I've got to say, I for one love these aero-inspired rims.
Parts of the interior are markedly different to combustion Omoda models, with the front of the cabin dominated by an enlarged twin-screen array, both 12.3-inch, one covering multimedia and another in front of the driver for instrumentation. The gear shift has also been moved to a steering column stalk, which frees up additional space in the centre console. Overall, this Omoda E5 has a contemporary exterior design without necessarily breaking new ground, while the interior exudes a suitably techie vibe.
The Omoda E5 is powered by a single permanent magnet synchronous electric motor. It's actually under here, driving the front wheels through a single-speed reduction gear auto transmission. Outputs are solid without being spectacular for a car of this size and close to 1.8 tonne weight.
At just over 4.4 metres long, a little over 1.8 metres wide and a fraction less than 1.6 metres tall, with a roughly 2.6 metre wheelbase, the Omoda E5 is a large, small SUV.
In terms of space up front, I've got plenty of breathing room because of this stadium-style array of screens set back from the driver, lots of headroom, and then when it comes to storage, there are decent pockets in the doors with room for bottles. There are 2 cup holders in the centre console. There's a wireless charging bay ahead of that, a little cubby in the centre here for bits and pieces, a larger compartment between the seats that's actually cooled as well, which is always nice, doubles as an armrest. There's a decent sized glove box, and then for power and connectivity, you've got USB-A and C. It's over the other side of the console from the driver, which is a little bit awkward, but a 12 volt down here as well. Next to this tray, which sits under the flying buttress part of the console. And an interesting factor is there's also a USB up here near the mirror, specifically for dash cams. In the back, I'm sitting behind the driver's seat set for my 183 centimetre position, and I've got tons of legroom. What I will say is that my thighs are up off the fairly flat back seat, so not as much support under there, but lots of footroom and actually lots of headroom too. Then when it comes to storage, again, there are pockets in the doors with room for bottles. This fold-down armrest has a pair of cup-cum-bottle holders. There are map pockets in the back of the front seats. So there's plenty of room to put stuff. And for power, there's a USB-A and a USB-C outlet, and this adjustable ventilation for backseaters is always a welcome addition.
Boot capacity with all seats up is 300 litres to the cargo cover, which is appreciably less than its key competitors, all of which hover around the 450 litre mark. That number rises to 1,079 litres with the second row folded, and there's a 19 litre frunk in the nose. And Chery deserves a big pat on the back for including a full-size spare wheel, because the Omoda E5 is the only EV on the market that does. The Omoda E5 is powered by a 61 kilowatt-hour lithium iron phosphate battery. It can accept an 80 kilowatt DC charge, which translates to a 30 to 80% charge time of around 28 minutes. And the Type 2 port in the centre of the nose makes charging a breeze, being able to park in front of a charger without having to think about which side the plug has to go in. Connect to AC at the maximum 9.9 kilowatt capacity, and you'll be looking at a 10 to 100% charge time in excess of 30 hours. Official energy consumption on the WLTP combined urban extra urban cycle is 15.5 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometres, and claimed range is a handy 430 kilometres. Over a mix of urban, suburban and freeway running on test, we saw a real-world average of 16.8 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometres, which is roughly what you'd expect for a reasonably rapid EV SUV of this size.
So Chery says this car will accelerate from 0 to 100 km/h in 7.6 seconds, which is pretty rapid. There are different modes, eco, normal and sport. I've got to say, not a huge amount of difference between the three of them, although sport will add that little bit of extra urgency to the accelerator. In terms of accelerator and brake inputs, can be a little bit abrupt, even when you're trying to really grease in the accelerator and squeeze on the brake, come off them and the car will react a little bit. So there's that. The transmission is controlled by a stalk on the right-hand side of the steering column, a la Mercedes-Benz, rather than a rotary controller. It takes a little bit to not treat it as a big indicator, but once you're there, it becomes second nature. Despite 8 months' work locally on powertrain integration, calibration of the ADAS safety systems and the suspension tune, I don't think this car is quite where it needs to be on the latter. It does feel, in terms of ride compliance, little high-frequency imperfections and bumps. It feels them quite markedly. Improves a lot once you get up to higher speeds. Suspension is by struts at the front and multi-links at the rear, and the tyres are a Kumho 55 aspect ratio in the sidewall, which we've driven on other cars. I don't think it's in the tyres or the 18-inch rims. There's just something in the tune that potentially needs a little more work. In terms of steering and handling, the steering's weight can be adjusted, but no matter what setting you're in, the road feel is modest. And it also has to be said that when you have the cruise control engaged, the lane keeping function is intrusive and persistent to the point where it's really always putting some little inputs into the wheel. It becomes almost unbearable. You can switch it off, but fact is you shouldn't have to. For braking, the physical brakes are ventilated discs at the front and solid rotors at the rear. And then there is, of course, regenerative braking available through 3 levels. First of all, to get to those levels, you've got to go through a couple of screens to get there and adjust it. Some paddles on the steering wheel would be much better. And even in the most aggressive level 3 mode, it's not enough to slow you to a stop. You don't get that kind of single pedal drive that you might get with Hyundai's iPedal for etc. It's not that kind of setup. It has been extremely windy around Canberra where we've been driving these cars on the launch program. However, there is some wind noise that's noticeable in the car, particularly around the mirrors. However, acoustic glass in the front of the top spec model reduces that quite noticeably. The driver attention warning setup seems to me to be overly intrusive. There was a section actually where I was driving, looking right up the road, and it was telling me that I hadn't been paying attention for some time. It too can be switched off, but once again, You shouldn't have to. It should work more effectively than it seems to. Petrol-powered versions of the Emotive 5 received a maximum 5-star ANCAP rating from testing in 2023, but the E5 electric variant isn't part of that assessment.
Chery expects an ANCAP rating for the E5 by the end of the year, with expectations of a 5-star result. For full details, check out our written review on the Cars Guide site. But active crash avoidance tech highlights include AEB, lane keeping assist, adaptive cruise control, blind spot monitoring, rear AEB, driver monitoring, tyre pressure monitoring, front and rear proximity sensors, and a range of other alerts, warnings and assists. Interestingly, the brand confirmed it has worked to evolve its ADAS safety functions on the internal combustion Emotive 5 since its launch around 18 months ago. And as hinted at in the driving section, it could be a similar scenario with this car. If a crash is unavoidable, there are 7 airbags on board, including a front setter bag to minimise head clash injuries in a side-on impact, as well as multi-collision brake to help control the car after an initial crash. For baby capsules and child seats, there are 3 top tethers and 2 Isofix anchors across the second row. Overall, the Emotive E5 safety report card gets more than a pass mark, but there's room for improvement.
Chery covers the Emotive E5 with a 7-year unlimited kilometre warranty, which is ahead of the mainstream market norm. It also covers the main drive battery with an 8-year unlimited kilometre cover, which again is ahead of the pack.
You'll also pick up 7 years roadside assist if you service the car at a Chery dealership, and the brand's 7-year cap price servicing program is super competitive. The scheduled service interval is 12 months, 20,000 kilometres, which is great, and each workshop visit averages around $227. That's sharp.
The Chery Emotive 5 gets solid ticks for value, performance, practicality, efficiency and a great ownership promise. But its ride compliance isn't quite up to class standards, and some of its safety assist features need further refinement, both of which count in a car that's likely to be driven by families day to day. Its keen price and specification will likely get it across the line for many, but we think it would benefit from some more judicious fine-tuning. D&R.